Dr. Lapini, the floor and the PowerPoint is yours. Selectman Washinsky will join us imminently. So,
thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So I've been asked tonight to talk about a preliminary look at budgetary implications of the override study committee options that you've been looking at. I have a brief 58-slide presentation for you this evening to attempt to help me do that.
One minute per slide.
I hope. I'm not sure about that.
I'm kidding.
So
as much time as you need, really. It's very important.
Thanks for the invitation, and I want to, as you did, I think the last time I was here a few weeks ago, express my appreciation to the individuals who worked on the override study committee and who helped us take a closer look at our practice. You're going to see a lot of work tonight that really came out of those discussions, and we very much appreciate the questions and the work that was done with us. So if I can make it go. So I'm going to focus this on a couple topics and come back to them at the end, and hopefully you'll agree that I've focused on these issues in particular. So we're going to talk about the increasing enrollment, not growing enrollment, but it continues to increase, as you know and have seen, and diversity of our students. And it's that second piece that, from my perspective, doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And so I'm going to take you through some information about that, what that looks like layered on top of some of the issues we've talked about in terms of the growing enrollment, and the increased complexity that brings to this conversation. And we'll talk some about the modeling that we've done around increases for classroom teachers, of supports and initiatives, and how that can play out as a model over the next few months for you. We're going to talk about concerns regarding Brookline High School, which doesn't get much discussion in all of this because we're talking about a 3-year model, but which I hope I leave you a little concerned about this evening in terms of where that's headed and what we're seeing in terms of the enrollment and in terms of the building itself, about technology and in particular devices, addressing issues of addressing equity, appropriate replacement schedule and infrastructure, and then the urgency that we're feeling with respect to capital plans that have been discussed and are ongoing. So that's what I hope I touch on and leave you with at the end of this. But I want to start where we should start all of these presentations, and that is with the achievement of our students. So our students are high-achieving students. It's a high-achieving school system, even as our enrollments have increased. Although, and this is particularly important in terms of the diversity that we're looking at, and that increased diversity, we have persistent achievement gaps that are present and are embedded within our overall results. So whether you look at the percentage of students who are scoring proficient and advanced from 2002 through 2014 on MCAS, if you're looking at the percentage of students who are scoring advanced, you see that we've risen to very high numbers. We've plateaued at those numbers. Whether you're looking at the growth of our students, and those are schools, each one of those bubbles are schools. The larger the bubble, the larger the school, and so you can probably tell what some of those schools actually represent, where we see high growth and high achievement in mathematics, and also high growth and high achievement in terms of the growth scores of our students. So we continue to be a very high-performing system with students who are performing at very high levels. We base our work, we base budget recommendations on a yearly basis, and I know you take a look at the superintendent's budget message thoroughly, around our core values of high achievement for all, of excellence in teaching, of collaboration, of respect for human differences, and of educational equity. And many, many programs and things that are in place in this system are in place around those core values. So if you look in high achievement for all, we believe that class size is an important part of that achievement mix. We believe that our early education programs represent an important element in that. We believe the fact that we have a comprehensive high school when many high schools have abandoned vocational programs and other kinds of offerings for students is an important part. I was really pleased recently in the discussions of the high school concept study to have the architects who are working with us say, we don't see this array of courses available in the high schools that we work with. And I think that's a tribute to what we're able to offer for our students. We see a rigorous program review process where we take a look at areas of the curriculum every X number of years in terms of how can we improve those. The Enrichment and Challenge Support Program, which is one of the few gifted and talented programs in the Commonwealth. Gifted and talented programming is not part of the law in the Commonwealth, but it exists in this district. And we're proud of that. And it right now is in that program review process. In other categories here, we have, in terms of excellence in teaching, the work that we've done in educator evaluation, our very strong mentoring programs, which provide coaches for teachers in their first, second, and third year. All of these things come out of this set of beliefs, which other people will stand in front of you and call levers, which we call beliefs. So in terms of policy choices and cost drivers, we're the first to admit that we build our budgets around these important factors, and they are where we spend our money. We believe in a pre-K to 8 model. There are other models that might cost less, some people might say are more efficient, but that is a hallmark of the public school system here. We believe in early childhood programs. This is one of the largest public school early childhood programs in the Commonwealth. And we believe that makes a difference in terms of those gaps and in terms of supporting the education we want to provide for students when they get into K to 8. We believe in neighborhood schools. Some of the models that you've looked at that have been advanced to you from this podium over the last number of weeks would challenge that and say that Brookline should look at something other than neighborhood schools. We believe that neighborhood schools are of value to our parents and are an important factor in what makes these schools as the positive experience that they are for students. We have a broad array of athletic choices. One I want to focus on is Brookline students educated in Brookline. I'll touch on this a little bit more. What I'm particularly talking about there are students, special education students, in terms of out-of-district placements and the fact that while our enrollment has increased dramatically since 2004, the number of students in those out-of-district placements has declined. It was approximately 84 in 2004. Today, I believe it's 61. That isn't easy. It isn't inexpensive. It means you build programs. It means you provide professional development for teachers. And you bring students back to an experience where they can flourish. Because quite frankly, if they can't flourish in the experience, I'd rather they go to an out-of-district placement. And we've accomplished a great deal in that area. Some of that's been done through the K1 paraprofessionals and other pieces that you see up here. So these are policy choices. They are cost drivers, clearly, and they are part of that belief system that I touched on earlier. So our current issues are around that strategic plan. We're in the process of looking at Strategic Plan 2.0 and building the action plans and the measurements of how we will report on our success, because we transparently provide on our success and our failures, by the way, to this community every year through an annual report that we publish and put on our website. Capital and operating plan, that's probably a surprise to all of you that capital and operating are a challenge to us right now. Achievement gaps, the shifting demographic profile, which I mentioned earlier, and one I want to focus on under that and come back to later on is this issue of translation services. So I'll probably say this a number of times this evening. Translation services is one of these areas where I've said regularly to people over the last year or so that as this district has shifted from a district of 5,000 kids to now a district over 7,500 kids, in certain areas we have to stop functioning like a mom and pop store. We could do translation services in a certain way when we were a district of 5,000 students and we didn't have nearly the level of students in these language areas that we have now. We can't do that anymore. We have to look to the urbans, and we're doing that now, in terms of how they deliver these kinds of services for help in terms of how this district is going to do it. Because in this area, and a number of others that I'll probably touch on tonight, the days of mom and pop store are over as we've grown. In special education, we've talked a great deal about this, but I'm happy to talk about it some more tonight. We've restructured management, we've built programs, We've put classroom paraprofessionals into kindergarten and first grade, focused them there, all in an effort to make sure that we didn't need as many paraprofessionals in other grades and that we guaranteed success for students in their educational experience. Collective bargaining, we are now functioning without collective bargaining agreements with any of our union at this time. And then there's the federal and state mandates, which probably don't get much airing with all of you, but we just went through a very interesting experience, a very interesting conversation about the Common Core and PARC and whether we were moving to PARC as statewide testing for next year or staying with MCAS while the state makes their decision. But there's been a lot of work done in curriculum development around the Common Core. We've had a tremendous overhaul of the entire educator evaluation system in the Commonwealth, and we've done terrific work led by Dr. Angela Allen in that area. Bullying prevention, which you know went into place as a new state law with a lot of new requirements a few years ago, all of which we've met and we believe exceeded. Student discipline, we have a new student discipline law this year, which really limits the number of times you'll see students suspended from school and compels us to look for other avenues of working with students. And Retail, which is an initiative very important to us here, that is a program designed to help classroom teachers to focus more on the needs of students who don't speak English as their primary language. But all of these initiatives have come down on our principals, on us at the central office, and most importantly, on our teachers, all in this time that we're experiencing this growth. So you've seen this model before. This talks to the model that was put forward to the advisory committee in April of 2014 by the Override Study Committee. It showed that at a 1% collective bargaining assumption, there was a certain impact of about $12 million, and at 2% collective bargaining, it was more like 14.5. And it has certain assumptions. I know Mr. Cronin's gone through these with you in great detail. They include things like health insurance at 5%, a number we haven't seen in the last number of years. But there are two major assumptions that go into this model in terms of the schools, right? And in terms of the override models that were built around the schools. One was that our enrollment of new students coming into the system every year would be 630 students through the year 2020, and beyond that would be 600 students. The second was an assumption of a 1% collective bargaining, which was true. We put it forward as a model, but it was built into these models. And again, you can see the difference here, but the model that was put forward was a 1% model. So I'm going to spend some time here telling you why we don't believe those assumptions are good assumptions for all of us to be using in this decision-making process. So they drove shortfalls, right, in terms of looking at the models that we put forward under those assumptions of 630 students for the time period that we're talking about and 1%. They drove a shortfall in one model of about $4.4 million and in the other model of about $1.5 million in terms of what they allocated under the two models that were put forward. So we start there in terms of this slide to really take a look at some other factors. And the first is, what if during that 3 years collective bargaining is 2% instead of 1%? And that adds in both models $2.3 million to those shortfalls that were represented earlier. And the fact that the FY15 use of one-time reserves, we have $1 million in our present budget from reserves that's not repeatable, that has to be accounted for. So we've accounted for it here. And so in group 2, for example, the $1.53 million quickly becomes 4.8 if you buy into the assumption of 2% about collective bargaining and you account for the $1 million from one-time funds that are used. So why don't we believe 630 until 2020 and then 600 after is a good assumption for you to use in your discussions? So the present kindergarten class, and this was done, help me Mr. Rowe, on September 19th. It's now 684 students, but on September 19th when we're using this for modeling, it was 681. And you can see that the last 3 classes have all been over 630 students, and indeed 4 of the 5 classes, 5 of the 6 classes are over 600 students, with 4 of the 6 over 630. So we believe, and we've adjusted for some of what you see in this presentation, we've adjusted that assumption to 650 students coming into kindergarten each year. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the makeup of that kindergarten and how we assign students and those kinds of things in this presentation as well. So you can see what that's driven in terms of the frequency of classes for those people who talk about class size. We have seen an increase in class size of about 1.5 students per class. You can see that's best represented here, where we show you the distribution by numbers of students in a class. And you see that this is moving to the right. Right? We're seeing more 22s, 23s than we were in 2005. And we've seen a shift in the average class size. But I quite frankly, and you're going to hear this from me a few times tonight, this is more important to me. This range is more important, because lots of things can get hidden in an average. But this range of where we are in terms of the assignments, the numbers of students that fall, numbers of classes that fall into each of these distributions, quite frankly, is what I pay most attention to, and I want to use that as a point later on in this presentation. So one of the things you saw back here, and you may have seen in the materials that I sent you a few weeks ago out of our presentation to the school committee, is that this year we've seen a decline that actually is a little bit larger than what we've seen normally in grades 4 through 8. We have generally seen, and you'll see this in a slide later on in the presentation, we've generally seen a decline in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We can actually plot that out over a 12-year period and show you on average what it's going to be each year. But I want to say here that this year in those grades, it's actually been a little bit larger. For example, the 8th grade, and you're going to see this later on, actually dropped about 30 students this year. And we're doing some work into the whys of that. And there are an assortment of reasons. I will say the one interesting thing about that 8th grade is of the 32 student decline that we saw, the 14 of those students are represented at the devotion school. Almost half. Now that's not true in the other grade levels, but it is true in that grade level. But we have exit data, and so we're looking now at that exit data, trying to figure out if there's something that's going to help us predict some patterns in the future. We don't think so. But we've taken these numbers and used them to reset the high school numbers. So what you see in the larger bar, starting with 2016, is the number we were projecting based on our prior calculations of those class sizes, those lower class sizes. But in the bar next to it, the blue bar, you're seeing the adjustment that we've made based on this year's 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And you can see that they still grow, but the growth is slowed slightly. So if you buy into the numbers we're looking at now in 4th through 8th grade, right, the growth at the high school is slower, but still by the year 2022 is in the 2,500 student range. So it's not enough, we believe, to make differences in terms of what those out-year plans need to be in terms of the high school, but we constantly go back and take a look at these numbers and readjust them, and I may come back to this in a bit. So we've talked some about what makes up classes, and you've seen these before because we provide them to you. I think we've provided them to you fairly regularly over the last year. This is what's represented by the materials fee program. You can see not only the numbers of students assigned to each school, you can see the breakdown by school and town. You can see the numbers across all of our grade levels. What you can't see are 2 really important factors. One is siblings, because we assign students to the same school as older siblings. The second factor that you don't see on this chart is when the assignment was made. Right? So anyone we have in the system by May 15th, anyone, materials fee, METCO, resident, resident including buffer zone and core, gets an assignment for a kindergarten so that they can attend the orientation programs in early June. And everyone else waits until August till we do the assignments. So, for example, you might look later and say, well, I see that you added a kindergarten at Baker, and I'm wondering why, if you added a kindergarten at Baker, you assigned 5 materials fee students there. Well, that's because 4 of them, 4 or 5, I can't remember which it is on this category, are siblings. By the way, if I go to METCO, you'll see, my gosh, there are 5 in Baker as well in kindergarten. And again, they're siblings. So unless we were to break up siblings, that's what we'll deal with. By the way, they didn't drive the need for that extra section, even with that. And you'll see that later on in the presentation. So there are the numbers for materials fee. It's a growing program. There are the numbers for METCO, capped at 300, sometimes less. You'll see we started this year with 296 students. And now I want to add one other factor for you. And this is part of that first slide that I showed you. So 38% of this year's kindergarten class were referred for home language surveys. That means there was something in the screening process that said we may have a need of ELL programming or other kinds of ELL support here. Someone said to me yesterday, that's an awful lot of international students. That would be an incorrect assumption. Everyone who ends up in an ELL program, everyone who needs a home language survey is not necessarily an international student. So 256 students were referred for a home language survey. 161 of them required a language assessment. After we looked at that survey, our professionals looked at the survey, they determined that 161 of them needed a language assessment. They then determined that, based on testing, that 154 of them required ELL services, which is a significant increase over last year, which represented a significant increase over the year before and over the year before. So what we found in this, and I need to explain a little bit about our programming here, is that 70 of the 154 students spoke a language other than is offered, other than is the focus of one of what we call our language-centered program. So I'll focus on one of them. We have ELL services available at every building, but we have language-centered services at certain buildings. So because of the size of the ELL population in Japanese, we offer language-centered programs at both Lawrence and Lincoln. We offer Hebrew-centered programming at Devotion. Okay? So 70 students spoke a language other than was the focus of one of those programs, but 84 spoke a language in one of those programs. Now, most of them didn't live in that district. So one of the things that I said to the school committee last week, I think got sort of put to the side in the discussions that we had with the override study, is that this is an additional factor in kindergarten assignments. Because those students have an opportunity to go to that language-centered program, even if they live in the even if it's a Hebrew program they might need and they live in the Runkle district. And the 70 students go to their neighborhood school. Now, what really complicates this is the 84 students can choose to go to their neighborhood school, but it's not where the language-centered program is. They're going to get ELL services. It's not in that. It's not necessarily focused in that language like some of those. We have a significant enough number of those populations that we created programs. Of the 84 students who speak a language served by the language-centered program, 52 chose to go to that language-centered program. 31 said, no thank you, I'll stay at the neighborhood school. It's more important to me to be here at the Runkle school than it is to have my child in that Japanese program at the Lincoln or Lawrence school. Their choice. And one family opted out of ELL services altogether, which is their right. So this is a growing number and a growing trend and a growing issue that makes those kindergarten numbers in terms of assignments lumpy, to use the technical term. as one example. So then we have buffer zones. So this represents each of our buffer zones in the district and the number of students who came to us in that kindergarten class from that buffer zone. Now, I want to assure you of something right off. This is a chart from early September. Those two students that you see out in the column that says buffer, they actually have been assigned to a school. They haven't been sitting for the last month. But we didn't update this chart. So but what you see is we have three actually large buffer zones, and they tend to be this Brookline Village area, right? Devotion Lawrence, Pierce Lawrence, Pierce Lincoln. They are our largest buffer zones. And again, anyone who moves in before May 15th gets an assignment so that they can attend kindergarten orientation programs in June, because we believe those programs for both students and families are important to the educational program, to their assignment, to classes. There are educationally very important reasons to us to have that occur when it occurs. And then everyone else, we wait, and you'll see that in another slide, we wait until August now to make those assignments. But there's exactly how our buffer zones break down. And again, what are you missing on this chart? Siblings and when they were assigned. So I talked about this earlier. This is Peter Rowe's favorite slide. I generally use it in every presentation I do just because Peter likes it so much. Whether it applies or not, actually, I tend to use it. So this shows you our cohorts between FY02 and FY15 and what that group looks like when they enter kindergarten and what they look like when they graduate. So, for simplicity's sake, we've taken it and turned it into one line. We've averaged those lines. And this is what you tend to see. Kindergarten represents about 92% of the first grade. There was a time a number of years ago, I think I had this conversation with a number of you, where we got our first really large kindergarten, 600 and some students, and people said to me, surely you captured them all. We won't see that same pattern. Guess what? We did. Doesn't matter how large the kindergarten is, we see that kind of increase going into first grade. And then you see this middle grade dip, which, by the way, is not true across the district. It is more a reflection of some schools than others. We know that there is some private school in that number. But we also know, one of the things that every consultant that's worked with us has said is, my gosh, you have an increase between 8th and 9th grade. Do you know that's unheard of? That doesn't happen. But it happens here. Now, we've continued to see a slight increase in the last few years, although it's not been as dramatic as that 2.2% increase. But you can see that the that the first grade largely predicts the senior class. So I'm going to stick with 12 years of data, if people don't mind, rather than this one last year that we just had, until I see if this continues to play itself out over a few years. This is us. This is what we look like. This is what we use to predict models of what high school will look like. Now, remember, we didn't do that. We just took this year's number in that earlier slide that I showed you. But I'd bet on this in the end. So that's the piece in terms of enrollment. And we've used 650 in our assumptions going forward from here. Now, collective bargaining. So we've taken a look at settlements in our area and in school systems. And I think that I could pretty easily convince you that for modeling purposes, it would be a much more effective model going forward based on these numbers of settlements in other districts to use 2% than 1%. It is true that the FY15 school department budget includes 1%. That is what's budgeted in the FY15 spending plan. But we don't believe it's responsible going forward in terms of looking at these numbers for your discussions of an FY16 to FY18 override to put those numbers in that 1% category based on what I'm showing you here. Now, there are exceptions. Someone asked me about Weston. What you don't see on here is what happened before, right? So we don't know if that's a 3-year agreement, and if it is, what 13-14 was. We don't know that. But what we know, I think, from looking at this, is there are a lot of 2s. So again, for our purposes for this discussion, we've adjusted that assumption for 16 through 18 to a 2. And I just want to remind you, while I have the opportunity, of our recent contract settlement, right? Which in 07 to 09, it was 3 3s, average 3% to the base. The 10-11 contract was an annual increase to the base of 1.1%. By the way, had a 0. The 12 to 14 agreement averaged 2.1%, and again, had a 0. So just so we have a little flavor of what collective bargaining's looked like here over the previous years as we contemplate the discussion before us. So we just pulled this out of the report here. Absent this enrollment growth, the OSC concluded that the town and school budgets would be roughly sustainable. The town is not projecting deficits, and per-student school spending has remained flat over the past 5 years on an inflation-adjusted basis. And just so you can see that, that's what they were citing. That over that period of time, since just after the override in 08, when our per-student spending was just over $17,000 per student, it actually declined in terms of what we spent per student, and still hasn't reached FY10 levels. So, again, what I had the opportunity to sit with you a few weeks ago and listen to described as levers. The school committee has levers that they can utilize. It's true, they have opportunities to do things in those areas. We would call beliefs. So we believe in low class size. I said to the school committee last week, and I believe it. If you take a look at our special ed data, which a lot of people have looked at and seen some great things, and I have a slide here a little bit later on, you know, that doesn't happen without a lot of things. There's a lot of good research on the percentage of special education referrals in larger class sizes, as one example, that it increases. So that we maintain our commitment to the METCO program because we value diversity here, that we maintain the materials fee program because we value being able to attract and retain staff who we want to hire, and that we maintain neighborhood schools, that we value buffer zones of reasonable geographic size, because we believe, and I didn't put this in here, but if you look at the kindergarten numbers on that first week of school, you will see 31 sections and 681 students, and a range in terms of those classes of 21 to 23. It can't be done much better than that. It can't be done much better than that, given all of the pieces that are moving in this equation between buffer zones, METCO, materials fee, and those language screenings that I talked with you about a few minutes ago. So I want to show you something in terms of the opportunity for, so we consolidated 3 sections. Mr. O, 3? 3. We consolidated 3 sections this year in upper grade levels. But I want to show you how this isn't necessarily predicted by a decline in the number of students. So this is the 6th going to 7th grade. We consolidated by 1 section because we lost a total of 15 students. So we were able to take a consolidation in 7th grade at the Baker School. By the way, one thing about 7th grade and 8th grade that's a little funnier to look at in terms of these kinds of things. That doesn't mean we necessarily at all times have 3 sections of 26 students moving. The way students operate in a middle-level schedule, there are smaller groups than that sometimes. Sometimes they are in classes of 26, but it's generally not in the majority of their classes. So middle levels are always a little bit misleading in that way. But here's 7th and 8th grade. By the way, this is what I pointed out to you earlier. That we saw a 32 student decline, and 14 students in that decline happened at the devotion school. And you can see here that we lost 32 students, and we were able again to consolidate one section. This is where it starts to get interesting. Here's a grade level, 1st to 2nd, where we grew by 8 students and consolidated a section. And that has more to do with that wonderful concept of substandard classrooms, right? So you can see what we were doing at devotion. We actually had a class of 15 because that was the room that was available to us. So we had to add a section because we couldn't go beyond that number, therefore we couldn't increase the numbers. For 2nd grade, we're not using that room. We could consolidate. And here's one where we lost 24 students and we couldn't. Well, take a look at those two. Gained 8, consolidated a section, lost 24, couldn't. It's not as predictable as just looking at the numbers because those numbers are spread over 8 schools. And unless we're going to get into the habit of saying to parents and students, you're going to move from one school to another, which I would recommend strongly against, then we're not going to be able to consolidate in some instances like this one. So what have we done in terms of making that assignment pattern tighter? Well, the first thing that we did is we stopped behaving like a mom and pop store. There's number 2 for the night, by the way. In terms of the way we register students and the way we assign them. We created this year an Office of Student Affairs, not only to look at our issues in terms of residency, and they're in the process also of doing residency verification on a yearly basis now under school committee policy of every family in our district, which is a huge undertaking. But they also are the place where all families register. Our goal is to have a parent center down the road where families can register, where they can look at ELL services, where they can look at special education services as their first step in to the district. That's our goal. So this was very helpful in terms of just this initial year of making sure that we were as efficient as possible in terms of assignments. We delayed initial assignments until May 15th. We'd done them earlier in the past. We had to work with our extended days to do that because many times families were putting down deposits, and by the time you as a buffer zone family were assigned, all the seats in that school's extended day were gone. So we had to work with them around these new deadlines. We clarified the materials fee eligibility and assignment process. We pushed it back. We created a yearly contract that spells out all the conditions of the materials fee program for everyone who's involved in that program. We delayed summer registration assignments till mid-August so that we would have the best picture of what each of the schools looked like. Even if you registered any time after that May 15th, June 1st, June 30th, July 15th, your assignment came in mid-August. The other thing that I should say along with that is there were a number of METCO students who we gave contingency assignments. We gave them an assignment but said, we'll be back to you in August as to whether we can hold on this assignment or we need to look at another school. In all cases, all 15, we were able to give them the school that we had first assigned them to. And then we invited families to move from one school to another up to the day before school. And when I say up to the day before school, I mean 7 o'clock the night before. We had situations where we saw that we were going to be larger than we wanted to be at one school. So in some cases of buffer zones, METCO, materials fee, we invited people to look at seats at another school. In fact, we not only did that in kindergarten, we did it in 2nd grade at the Baker School. In 2nd grade at the Baker School, in late August, the principal sent out a letter inviting anyone, saying those classes are probably going to be larger than we would like. We're not going to be able to add another section. We don't have enough students to necessarily add another section, and we don't have room if we did. So we have seats at the Lincoln School. Anyone interested? And we had a few families take us up on that offer. But it was their choice by our policies, their choice. So those are some of the strategies that we employed. So we titled this, as I look at this today, right? That was our working title for this presentation. So we have 681, now 684 students in our kindergarten. The last 3 kindergartens have averaged 659, hence our adjustment to 650. I think you would agree with that. We have a Hancock Village expansion that we're keeping our eye on, which we understand could be 184 units, 344 bedrooms, 22 lofts that we have no numbers in any of these models to account for. And so the best information we have available demonstrates that enrollment pressure is not abating anytime soon. So we put forward last year a model based on a certain set of assumptions that said, if our enrollment is going to increase by these numbers each year, and we made some adjustments to it to not use 630, but instead use 650, and even use those new numbers in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. What do we think of some of the formula-driven areas like nursing, areas like classroom teacher, areas like guidance counselor, psychologist? What do we think they might look like under certain assumptions put forward by their professional associations? It's a reasonable set of assumptions that we began to work with, and we created this model. And I can tell you that most of what we talked about here in FY15, we've done. Now, I'm going to talk about technology in a few minutes, and I can tell you that what was put into this plan for FY15 in terms of technology, we've done. So, here's an example. Nursing. So we looked at ratios available through the National Association of School Nurses, and they use a more complicated formula of 1 nurse for every 750 students in the general population, 1 nurse for every 225 students in student populations requiring daily professional nursing services, and 1 nurse for every 125 in student populations with complex healthcare needs. So for the sake of this model, we rounded, and we used 1 to 500. And then we made some assumptions, I'll come back to this in a second, about the size of each of our schools come October 1st of 2018. We made some assumptions based on where they were, how we were projecting out enrollments, and then we applied the formula. Okay, and we got an increase of 4.8 nurses here, and you can see how we phased that in. We actually projected to add 1.2 nurses in FY15. Check mark. Check it off. It's done. In FY16, we allotted here to do a good percentage of what we call the catch-up, of what would it take to bring us to formula on nurses, and then we projected out per those enrollments from there. Very simple, very formula-driven for this particular area. In elementary vice principals, we again looked at size of school, and we looked at the kind of administrative support that we believe needed to be put forward to carry out the educator evaluation that's in place. By the way, the one major change in educator evaluation is yearly evaluation instead of the old model, which was every other year. So we've doubled the load of principals on principals and coordinators for educator evaluation under the new law. So we had originally projected for this year adding 1 vice principal shared between Baker and Pierce. I can tell you that because of the growth of the Baker School, they originally decided after this model was put forward that the position would go to Pierce. But when Baker School became the largest school in the district, and the 3 principals you should know between Devotion, Baker, and Pierce have a daily contest as to who's the largest, because it actually does vary by the day. Now, they're all in that 8:15-ish range. We added 1 at Baker. So we've actually added 2 positions in here. But you can see that the very simple formula we used here is we said if a building is going to be in that 1,000-student range, Selectman DeWitt, as we're working on with the Devotion School, that's going to be 1,000 students, we said it's a principal and 3 vice principals. In the 800 range, it's a principal and 2. And for our other schools, it's a principal and 1. And that's largely by looking at the number of staff that will be there and focusing, at least in part, on the educator evaluation responsibilities that each of those people will have. So again, it's a model. The other model that's based more on a programmatic goal of ours is around literacy. where we are in the process of putting into place a number of strategies that require literacy coaches and literacy interventionists. And we've gone through a modeling exercise here and therefore added literacy staff across the district in each of the elementary schools by this formula. So we've done that for each of those areas. And I don't know if you've seen all of those, but we've done that. And again, it's a little dated now in that they were based on some older enrollment projections. But we've updated a number of them and are in the process of looking at some of the others in terms of updating them for going forward. So in terms of the technology plan, I just want to let me skip here first so I can focus on what I think we should focus on. So the Override Study Committee report says, over the FY16-18 term of the override, there is broad OSC support for 100% of the superintendent's request for devices, for equity across the schools and to reduce replacement times, applications, and mounted projection. To ensure technology alignment, we recommend that governance issues be resolved. We agree. They went on to say, we want to create an atmosphere of consistent communication and collaboration between town and schools. We suggest a new town-school MOU be developed on technology governance. We agree. So I just want to skip back here for a second. I want to tell you 2 or 3 quick things. So a couple weeks ago, totally unscripted, not motivated by your superintendent, our student rep to the school committee talked about the amount of technology that we were able to bring to the high school this year and how teachers are thrilled that they now have available to them what many of our comparison districts have had available to them for a number of years. And he highlighted some of the things that were beginning to happen in classrooms around that. Totally unprovoked by the superintendent. I was at a school yesterday watching the end of a literacy lesson, and the math specialist came into the room, and the teacher said, we're going to put away literacy now, and we're going to start on math. And remember, today is the day that we're doing, she didn't use this word, but we're doing that formative assessment. On cue, in came the computer cart. Each student took their device, went online, and began individually to work on a formative assessment that was going to help that math specialist and that teacher figure out exactly where those students were on each of the concepts being assessed and therefore create almost a prescriptive plan for their instruction. Impossible in this school system a year ago. In a world of differentiation, that was impossible to do. And the only other example I want to provide to you came from a staff member who stopped me when I was in that same school yesterday and said, has anyone told you about the exciting, I'm excited, project that I'm involved in, where I am working with science teachers across the country to create lessons that then are videotaped in my classroom and are screened and put into, if they're selected, into a library that's available to not only our science teachers, but science teachers across the country in terms of having lessons that have been vetted, that there's a video available of, right? And that people can access. Again, on a much more limited basis before we were able to finally implement the 4-year replacement cycle this year, much more difficult even at the elementary level, I can tell you almost all but impossible at the high school level. So what does the technology plan bring to students and teachers? Those 3 examples and much, much more. But the main issue that we want to discuss here, right, is this line that says staffing. Because again, that's what the Override Study Committee asked us to speak more specifically with you about. So you see that we plugged numbers in there because we didn't have them at the time, because many of those issues that they talked about in the recommendations we hadn't yet completed, and in fact, some of them haven't completed yet. So we want to use this opportunity to look at staff to maximize the town-school partnership framework for the public schools of Brookline vision. Kevin Stokes, who's here tonight, who I just want to thank for his work with us on putting this plan together. I would say, and I think all the members of my staff would say, that this process over the last year has really brought Kevin's position alive in the schools, has really brought Kevin's position into part of our senior management team in terms of trying to figure out this set of problems, because it's not easy. So there's more of a focus on reallocating technology infrastructure into the CIO budget. There's a focus on modifying, adapting the functions, roles of existing technology support staff before we start talking about new positions. Now, before everyone applauds that, that's not easy. We have positions that are individually contracted. We have positions that are in collective bargaining agreements. Taking a look at reconfiguring those positions doesn't happen overnight. It creates some work, it creates some planning, it creates some negotiation that's going to happen before we can accomplish any part of that part of the goal. So we've tried to improve our existing capability to remotely manage and support increased numbers of devices. We've provided online access to professional development materials, scheduling, and resources. We've better use of tools to support growth and operations. And this last area of student privacy is a key area for us, and I know Kevin, in work with our staff, has really focused on this in terms of limiting access to available data, ensuring that vendor partnerships are closely examined, and that we have a good educational program for staff and students in terms of what's available to them and our safeguards that are in place. So we feel we're really well positioned in terms of the work with the town to put that staffing plan together at numbers that I'll confidently say, they're going to look at me funny, that will come in under the numbers that we have in this plan going forward. So I've also been asked to spend a little bit of time on reconciling this funding gap. So what I don't have for you tonight is the budget. But you didn't expect me to have the budget. What I can talk with you about are some of the choices that the school committee and my senior staff and our leadership team are going to be talking about over the coming months in terms of these choices, if indeed these are the numbers, these are the models that you would use. So first, and these are rather obvious, I think, we have the option to implement selective deceleration or not to fund program initiatives in the model, right? So there are things in the model, like desired ratios. We can modify those ratios. There's a cost in terms of program. We can curtail or reduce initiatives, literacy, technology. Again, there's a cost to that. But that would certainly be on the table in terms of things that are in the model. We have the option to not fund programs or initiatives that are currently underway. I would just caution us to this quote from the Override Study Committee report that says, for the past several years, the PSB has identified efficiencies, consolidating and eliminating certain positions. These efforts have been successful and have allowed the PSB to operate with less on an inflation-adjusted pupil basis, yet still producing best results ever in FY 2013. There's a cost to cutting into what we presently do. We could violate, that's the right word, our policies and beliefs in terms of METCO, materials fee, class size. Or we could do some combination of the three. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of that bullet under the one that talked about inflation adjusted and things that we've been able to achieve, this was a slide that was used with the Override Study Committee. We made significant changes to special education. And people have said to me a number of times, and have said to Dr. Schmuckler a number of times, so how have you been able to reduce the number of students in out-of-district placements? How have you been able to hold the percentages the same in terms of students with IEP? How's that happen? And there's no one answer. It's through a number of regular education interventions, like Child Study Team. It's through our K-1 paraprofessional model. It's through building programs in the district. It's through creating, when we had money available from the feds, it's through creating our team facilitator model. All of those are part of that equation. And my fear, having done this for 20 years and accomplished these kinds of results in a couple of districts now, is that if you mess too much with any part of the formula, you might drive something back to look like the dotted line, which is where we were headed in special education before these reforms were put into place. And if I can remind you of the conversations that we had then, we said we had a really interesting combination of things happening to us. We were spending lots of money and parents weren't satisfied. We know that from the data we had then. We were spending lots of money in special education and parents weren't satisfied. And we're much more confident in terms of we know what we're spending today. We know the numbers that have come down in terms of out-of-district placements. And our anecdotal evidence tells us, by people coming back to the district, by choosing to look at our programs rather than programs in private placements, that parents are more satisfied with what we're doing as well. And I'm concerned about messing with that formula. So, in terms of the catch-up, these were pieces that over the 3 years are included. And absolutely, can we go back and readjust those formulas in some of these areas? And that's what we would do. We would fund some of them fully, and others we would put off, kick the can, in terms of the recommendations that we made to the school committee. In terms of our present programs, this is a partial list. And I want to say this about both lists, right? Both these lists. The problem with creating a list of any type for this kind of discussion is someone says, oh, he has psychologists on the list. Oh, he has the Elementary World Language program on the list. You should draw no assumptions other than the fact that they were maybe easier numbers to grab onto in terms of the FTE that make up the number in that particular program. So here are some program costs. And what the gap, and we've talked earlier about what the gaps might be. And these are two areas: future programming, present programming, that we'll have to discuss with the school committee should those be the gaps. So I was also asked to talk about a no override scenario. And this is probably the most personal opinion of some of this, but I think I can support it. So you would see, we believe, based on that model of the numbers of students who are coming, based on the assumptions that are in the models that have been created, you would see severe reductions to staffing, programming, and initiatives proposed. You would see severe reductions to current programs. You would see severe changes in current beliefs and policies. I don't speak for the school committee on that, but I quite frankly don't know how they'd be able to escape that. Most importantly to me, you would see inadequate support for classroom teachers in terms of literacy specialists, math specialists, psychologists, those mental health issues that we're dealing with in the classroom in our district today. You would not see the kinds of services that are required to support students and to support our teachers. Most troubling to me, you would see a compromising of supports for our most vulnerable students. One of the exceptions that I take with group number 1 in terms of the specific recommendations that they made, and I think it actually says this in another part of the report, is they've reduced funding in as much as they put forward recommendations for our most vulnerable populations in regular education, thereby, in my opinion, sentencing those students to special education and leaving parents with no other option other than to pursue an IEP because they can't get the supports through regular education. That would be a huge, huge mistake. I believe an inability to implement the spirit and letter of collective bargaining agreements. I went to a district a number of years ago. I'm on the North Shore. initial Beverly, that my first day in, the principals, the senior staff said to me, so we have a really interesting problem. We have a certain requirement in terms of certain supports in the collective bargaining agreement. I said, well, that's great, art, music, phys ed, prep periods for teachers. And they said, and we can't honor it. We don't have enough of that staff and we don't have the budget to do it. I'm not suggesting that's where we'd be, but I am suggesting that there are certain areas where the spirit and letter of the collective bargaining agreements would be compromised. An inability to administer buildings in the district. I talked to you earlier about evaluation as one component. As one component. We would not, I don't believe under this scenario, be able to honor the law around educator evaluation. And a compromised ability to attract and retain teachers. And I just want to be really frank with you here. Our teachers are terrific. They're amazing. I'm in buildings nearly every day this year, which is a great thing for me to be able to set as a goal of mine in working with the school committee. And I see really amazing work. And I see it in rooms that are substandard and under conditions that are very difficult right now for them. And they are doing amazing things with our students. You should be very proud. I am. But they have a number of the things that we've laid out in here, technology. I mean, quite frankly, folks, the technology plan that we've put forward, one of my colleagues in another district calls basic plumbing. There's nothing fancy about that plan. And our teachers would have that plan available to them in other districts. Right now. Right now. So I was also asked about if there's no override, what would happen to class size? So here's my best guess, based on some calculation. If you assume 650 students coming in each year, which we've done in our modeling, and that would be about growth of about 150 students a year, over our 252 existing sections, we believe that that would drive an increase of around 0.6 students to class size each year. So about 2 students over the 3-year period. But I have to tell you, remember I said earlier that I talk in terms of ranges, not in averages, because averages mask a lot. Factor into that, you're talking about that happening over 8 schools. So the second time tonight that I'll use the word lumpy. That makes those data extremely lumpy, right? So at its best, we believe this is the kind of shift that would occur in sections. We believe class sizes would range more in the neighborhood of that 21 up to 28. But I have to tell you that based on what I experience when I go through ranges like this, I actually believe we would have classes of 19, some of them, somewhere in the district, and I believe we would have classes of 30, because that sectioning in terms of being spread over 8 schools would create those kind of disparities. That's what I believe. This is what it looks like just in terms of taking that 0.6 and laying it out. I believe it's much lumpier than what it looks like there. So I want to talk for a couple minutes about capital, which I think kind of melds together with this, because I think, remember in slide 1, I said I think there's an urgency. And I want to try to convince those of you who don't agree with me right now of that point. So you'll remember that in terms of the capital plan that's been put forward, we have a plan. And the plan says we're going to renovate and add to the devotion school, 5 sections, 1,000 students. And that it would be available in September 2019. The plan says we're going to renovate and add to the Driscoll School, 4 sections, 800 students. It would be available in September 19. That the Brookline High School solution would begin in July of 2020. That we utilize OLS, Old Lincoln School, for elementary swing space until June of 19. And then for the high school, beginning in September of 19, we would have it available because we no longer fit. Sometime in 19 or 20, we no longer fit under our present assumptions about the way schedule works, etc. The plan did not account, however, for Baker School and assumed Pierce would be addressed sometime beyond 2021. So what are the concerns about the current plan? Well, one concern is we have uncertainty around the Driscoll School Statement of Interest. We have a desire to relocate all devotion school students during construction, not just the 6, 7, 8. That one was for you, Selectmen DeWitt. You're welcome. There may be a need for additional space beyond devotion and Driscoll, and hence the 9 school conversation that we're involved in now. And given in current enrollment projections, both Baker and Pierce will exceed capacity in the next 2 years. Not may, will. And just to add to the parade, it is now clear that OLS will not be available for use by Brookline High School on September 19th because we're going to be in that building for elementary beyond that date. Because there is not going to be a Driscoll for September 19th. We don't know if there'll be devotion for September 19th. So I thought we should talk a bit about the alternate strategies being considered. So it is clear to me that we will be in OLS as a middle-level school for longer than originally anticipated. I have no idea what that date is, but I know it's not September 19th. We're going to need to look at something at Pierce and Baker in that time frame. We've talked a number of times about some short-term kinds of ideas at Pierce. I'll leave that whole conversation for another day, but they need to be part of this conversation. I've said very openly, when people say to me, who else is looking at Old Lincoln School? Baker. We believe we're going to be renting additional space. If it's not for pre-K, and it will be, it may be offices, we're going to be renting additional spaces, which will drive that $500,000 a year figure up. And one thing I've been particularly open about everywhere I go is that since we're not going to make it beyond 2020 at Brookline High School, we are beginning now the process of looking at alternatives. One of those alternatives has to do with the way we schedule. So I'll give you an example. It is only an example. There's a school district in Washington State that our people at the high school are in conversation with because they delayed a second high school project for too long. They're building it now. It was too late. They don't have room. So for the 2 years that they're constructing their second high school, they are running a high school schedule that goes from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. with 80% of the students scheduled in each of 11 periods. By scheduling 80% of the students, they can make them fit in the school for that 2-year period. We're looking at that model and others. Because come 2019 or 2020, what we're doing now doesn't work, and we don't have alternatives. And I want to be really, really clear about that. That's not a maybe. That's a fact. As we stand here today and look at the enrollments that are forecast through that period of time, even under the adjusted enrollments that I showed you tonight. So I'll end where I started. We have increasing enrollment, not increased enrollment, increasing enrollment, and diversity, and I showed you one example of that diversity, only one example of that diversity tonight. There are lots of examples that we could show you. We've provided models for classroom teachers, supports, and initiatives that we believe can be used to look at different scenarios. We have grave concerns about Brookline High School in terms of the operating and capital. I hope you do now as well. We believe we've put forward a technology plan that provides the basic infrastructure, the plumbing, if you will, for students and teachers to be able to have the opportunities available that they have in our neighboring and our like school districts. And we are working with the CIO on the staffing model that will most efficiently support that plan. And we believe there is an urgency because of Baker, because of Pierce, because of the need for, whether it's a 9th school, Driscoll, 9th school, and Driscoll, the devotion school that's coming, to accommodate by what we think are reasonable projections the students who we know are coming. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'm sure we have some questions. Selectman Daley.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was enlightening. But my question is, okay, I'm getting that you don't like.
That was enlightening, but?
No, I'm getting that you don't like either version 1 or version 2 of the override study committee recommendations. So my question to you is, what are your numbers that you think are more appropriate? We'll leave aside the high school for the minute, and
right, we're talking about that 3-year period of time.
We'll talk about the operating budget.
So again, let me just modify part of what you said. It's not a matter of what I like, right? It's a matter of, we believe we've put forward reasonable models that say they don't work. They will cause you and us to be involved in a conversation about asking for increased dollars while we're talking about what we'll cut. Okay? From our perspective, that's what we've, or not deliver in terms of the supports that are necessary, that you'll hear from parents are necessary, that they'll tell you that in the last 5 years in terms of budgets, that in terms of what I've recommended, I've neglected. Guilty as charged. We have focused on the classroom and not on guidance and some of those other areas. We have done that. We really worked hard to put our money where our priority was in terms of keeping those class sizes at that number. I'm just trying to find what we're looking at. I'm not sure that's for me to suggest. I mean, it's tough. No, I'm sure because, but not sure because we haven't started to go through the specifics with the school committee. Yes, I believe it's a number that's somewhere beyond that group 2 number. Yes, I believe we have some work that we can do with the modeling in terms of bringing those numbers down or spreading them out over a longer period of time. There are those kinds of things that we recognize that we're going to have to do in terms of working with you.
Okay, can I suggest that you, as soon as possible, give us a ballpark, because we're having public hearings, and it would be appropriate for people to be able to respond not only to the override study committee's recommendations, but to your recommendation.
Thank you, Selectman Daley, for the question. Susan Wolf-Ditkoff, I'm the chairman of the school committee and the former chair, happily the former chair of the override study committee, co-chair of the override study committee. So the way this budget process works, I mean, the superintendent, obviously, any staff is limited in what they can say in terms of advocating or not advocating for any sort of an override. But what I can tell you is that our job, the school committee's job with the administration this fall is to do our budget development process the way that we always do. And so you can take a look at the budget development process calendar if you want, but the relevant dates are in early November. We set out our budget priorities, with our budget directives for the superintendent and for the administration, for Peter Rowe and others and the principals to develop their budget around. So the way that we set priorities by saying things like, here are the things that absolutely have to be protected, or here are the things that we're willing to have a discussion about, show us different models. That conversation is an early November conversation. And then from the time that the budget directives get voted, which is sort of the December timeframe through the early spring, is when the budget actually gets developed and trade-offs get made. So I think it's a budget development process, I would say, and the priorities are what we're working on this fall. But that is a little bit different from the actual cuts on the table, if you will, which doesn't come until a little bit later.
But Ken, what is our schedule? I thought we were going to try to vote on something. by
By
December?
January.
Well,
January. Okay.
Yeah,
Selectman Waschinsky?
it seems to me that you're going to need to accelerate some of your decision-making, because I don't see how we can come up with numbers to put on the ballot if we don't know what at least at the very least, a general sense, what those numbers are buying and what, and present to the voters, why should one number be put on the ballot versus another number?
Right, and so I think that to the extent that there are two numbers that are getting considered, should we do X or should we do Y, that's something that the administration can model and the school committee can discuss. I think the issue is that any of these over a 3-year period are models, essentially, and they're dependent on assumptions and projections and all that sort of thing, with the usual caveats. But yeah, that's something that, but it can't be sort of an infinite list, right? It has to be more of a confined list, and that's where the budget directives come into play, and where certain scenarios we can ask for certain sets of models around those scenarios.
Well, I'm wondering if you can take the model that was developed by one of the override study committee members and use that, plugging in some of your higher class size assumption and your class size neighborhood school assumptions, and if you can use that to give us
And we will also,
some additional data.
and the other piece is that we will also run that against the model that we created in terms of looking at some of those assumptions. And sure, we'll be doing that during that time frame as well. And we'll work with you on what your time frame is to make sure you have the information you need.
Selectman Franco?
Well, I think the message we want to deliver is we have a public hearing on Thursday, and the sooner you do that, the better. I respect the fact that your budget directive process starts in early November and stretches to the spring, but we need some stakes in the ground sooner rather than later.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Can you put slide 52 up? So this is the no override scenario. So it seems to me that's going to be one of the visions we're going to have to convey to the voters. We have to give them a reason to want to pay more money. And it seems to me that general statements like severe reductions to staffing and programs, that's fine as a start, but I think we're going to need to fill that in a bit more.
No question.
And really present the voters a vision of what voting no means.
Yeah, I want to be clear. Yes, I completely agree with you. But I just want to say that that doesn't start in my mind with none of that happens, right? Some of those things. I mean, anybody who's seen our budgets, who's seen what I recommend, no, I don't believe in starting with what you do right now and assuming you're going to continue to do all of that and then either build or whatever on that. That's not how we budget. We take a look at programs and we make priorities, and we decide some of the things that are in that model, they are priorities. They need to happen, or they're going to cost us money in other places, right? So some of those things will happen, and there therefore will be deeper cuts in other areas to make that happen. So that's one of the complicating factors for us. But in terms of some basic modeling, sure, we can do that.
It's a yin and a yang. I mean, you can phrase the same question in terms of what you get by voting for it or what you lose by voting against it.
So the way I see it, I think we need to spell out, what does the Group 1 approach yield? What does the world look like with Group 1? What does the world look like with Group 2? What does the world look like with voting no? And what does the world look like if you have an alternative approach? What does the world look like
I
there?
just want to make sure I'm clear. That's 4 budgets. Okay.
Or more.
And could you have them next week?
Yeah, but
I thought you wanted them by Thursday. Sorry.
But, I'm sitting here struggling, how do we put something on the ballot
Yep.
without
Yep.
that information?
Got it.
I'd like to follow up a little bit, because what I know we're doing modeling, and I know all modeling is based on assumptions, and we are doing our best to pin down to the most reliable data set. But it seems to me that in order for us to ask the voters, we need to be able to be pretty concrete about what we're asking for and where those dollars will go. And I'm not asking for the impossible, but I do believe that at some point we cannot talk models. We have to say the impact of the following budget, or let's just put it this way, no override, and then I don't know if it's 3 different alternatives. Maybe it's a level services alternative and an alternative that says this is where we ought to be, and forget what the override study committee said. But what I really want is the most concrete data that can be provided in terms of actual FTEs of whatever would be either not hired, laid off, or hired. But I think that level of concrete information is absolutely going to be essential. I'm not asking for it by Thursday, okay?
Thank you.
I know you're not going to do that. But I am saying that collectively, we're in a partnership here. Our credibility is on the line, and we can certainly say we now have data saying kindergarten enrollments are increasing. I believe I can make that statement. I'm not speculating about that anymore. I think we need to say something more clearly concrete about this number of students will oblige us to provide this number of classrooms. And to the extent that we can talk about, and we will be actually based on looking at devotion, we can talk about per square foot construction costs coming up. We will have some level of ability to quantify things. But I'm really, really concerned that we come up with more quantifiable data as opposed to modeling.
Sure.
All right?
And
I know that's tough, all right?
well,
Not trying to be unfair.
I'm happy, we're happy to try to do it. I'll let the chair speak in a sec. I just want to say, and the chair knows that this is what we were asked to do tonight.
Sure,
How do we
I
see this
get it.
right now, right? And so that's what we tried to deliver tonight. We know, well, I don't know if I knew I had 5 budgets ahead of me, but we know we have a number of budget scenarios in terms of working with the school committee, in terms of working with all of you, in terms of working with town staff, to make sure that we can put together, because I agree, you need to put a specific information in front of the voters in terms of what will people get, right? What are the possibilities? What are the possible losses? What are the possible gains in that May timeframe? And we want to make sure you have all that information.
Thank you.
So I was just going to say something similar, which is that by the time it gets to a number that's getting put on a ballot, what people are voting for or what the consequences of not voting that, I think that isn't something that I'm worried about. I think the school committee is very focused on that being crisp, clear, et cetera. I think one of the things that we've been talking about as a school committee is how does one answer that question for on an almost infinite number of potential budgets. So I think that's where the question of, well, so if there's a number, then it's much easier to say, based on that number, here's what that budget would look like. And if they were, a big number and a small number, here's what it would look like. What we can't do is, I don't know if we do 5 budgets. I think it's not at that level of detail for sure. And so that's where I think there's a difference between what the school committee can do, which is set out principles, priorities, things that have to get, we believe have to be maintained or whatnot, and then budgets get built off of those.
Right.
And so I think that's where the question is, and I think the idea of over the course of this fall, what does the intersection between the 2 processes need to look like, so that, we've been talking about this for months, that you all have the information you need, when you need it, but we can't respond, the school committee can't respond, I don't think the administration can respond in 2 days about 5 budgets.
Sure. I think, however, probably even by Thursday, we could plug in the higher enrollment number and the change in collective bargaining assumption to the financial model that the Override Study Committee has available to it.
It's actually right here.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's right in these slides, so, yes.
I hear a lot about, from people claiming that we have a problem with illegal students in the town. We have students who technically, for practical purposes, are living outside of Brookline, but have found sneaky ways around our enrollment process to enroll in Brookline.
So that gives me,
I know you've increased the registration requirements, because I went through it myself, but
thank you
do we
very much
have
for your
any-
cooperation.
do we have any mechanics or any quantifiers? Have we identified more cheaters? Have we, do we have an estimate for how many are still getting around the system? I've heard some crazy numbers.
I'll bet you have, yeah. So this gives me my third opportunity of the evening to say we have to stop behaving like a mom and pop store, and that's the Office of Student Affairs that's done that. And it was really put into place for a couple of reasons. I talked about registration earlier. This gives me a chance to talk about the issue of residency verification, which we brought in a new person. Her first day, we started through the process of residency verification. Welcome to Brookline. Thanks for working with us. And it was quite a summer. And we did a soft launch of that. Meaning right from the beginning, we said we're going to go through this process. We're going to keep working with families. We're going to come to some number. We're not going to bar the doors on day one for this year. We're going to implement this in a way that makes sense and helps us actually take a look at the data. We have a pretty good percentage of families that have not yet verified, and we're going to another step in terms of doing that out of that office. I said to the Override Study Committee, and I don't think I've changed my view on this, we have some number. And I've always believed that number is beyond the number who end up with Dr. Schmuckler or in my office in terms of a residency hearing. And they are each of those situations are extremely time-consuming and resource-intensive, right? Because they occupy not only our people who do that work, sometimes in cooperation with some of our partners in the police department and people in our central office and people at our buildings and all of those kinds of things to look at one case. We have one right now that we've been looking at over the last week that has involved any number of people in what's a lengthy process. So I'll be better able to answer that in a few months as we take that next step. But we still have the vast majority of families and students have gone through the process. Some have not. I believe one of the questions we'll be dealing with in the future is, do we continue to implement this soft implementation of it, or do we establish some more certain, some more specific kinds of dates in terms of things are in, or there isn't a schedule issued, or whatever it may be. And we're going to have to look at those kinds of pieces down the road. The good news is we have the mechanics built now that didn't exist a year ago for actually looking at this issue on a student-by-student, family-by-family basis and dealing with it.
Is there a number you can share? You said you had a good idea what you thought the percentage is.
The percentage that have not yet completed the process?
Yeah, that's a good start.
I think we're somewhere north of 81% right now that have completed the process. That doesn't mean all of those students are not residents, or we think there's some reason they're avoiding us or whatever. There are lots of reasons. But I've said regularly, I believe the number was more than single digits and probably less than 3 digits. I have no data to back that up, but that's my belief.
Do we have any programs that involve volunteer teaching, maybe by retirees, in particular areas where experience and life experience can be helpful, such as literacy programs maybe, English second language programs?
No. We don't, this is not a district that historically, and I was going to look at Mr. Morris because it was a goal of his a number of years ago that we talked a lot about in terms of getting a better, more organized kind of volunteer program in place. We have not been able to do that. I know this wasn't your question, but I want to caution us all in terms of looking at that as a replacement for a literacy specialist or an ELL teacher or a classroom teacher, because it's not. Those programs, where they're successful, are meant to supplement those efforts.
Is it possible that programs like that can at least reduce the faculty requirements? In an atmosphere of growth.
I don't think so. They can reduce other kinds of growth. There are districts, for example, I'll just use sorry for the example, but I want to come up with one here. There are districts that use programs like that instead of having a central receptionist. They have greeters and things, so that do the kind of thing you're talking about in that way, whether it's in a school or in a district, not so much in a direct teaching responsibility. The requirements now in terms of licensure, the requirements now in terms of fingerprint checks, in terms of CORI checks and all, are pretty overwhelming in terms of putting people in direct unsupervised access with students.
On your special education costs slide, it's great that our special education costs are not following the dotted line that you've indicated, but when I look at the numbers of how much it's growing every year, it's still above the growth in other areas of the school, unless I'm reading it wrong, right, of the school system.
I lost my slide, so I'll have to. I think the most recent percentage was 4.1. There was a 3.8. There are increasing costs, sure,
but they increase at a higher rate than the rest of the school population, right?
No,
They don't.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. We'd be glad to show you some data on that. We have that on some separate materials. But no, over the last number of years, it's actually been less than the growth across the rest of the district.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that then.
Yeah. Well, can I just, because there's a sensitivity here, right? So parents don't want to hear that we're solving budget problems. And again, I know this wasn't your question, but it gives me a chance to say this for them. Parents don't want to hear that we're solving our budget problems on the backs of their children who have IEPs.
Right.
We've done what we've done in the district because we believe that Brookline students, most all of them, can benefit by being educated here in programs that we create here. It's terrific. I mean, they cost money, building programs. Building good programs cost money. We have programs where we brought Landmark in as consultants, a private school, as consultants to our programs to make sure they're the kind of programs that parents are going to want to enroll their children in, right? That's expensive, professional development. But it allows those students to come to school here, which is our goal. And yes, it has also helped us control costs, limit the number of students who are going to out-of-district placements, all great things, right? But if we build programs and they're not good programs, those numbers are going back up.
I asked the question not because I think you guys are doing anything wrong in this, and not because I'm advocating for a change, but more because I'm advocating for a change at Beacon Hill.
Yes.
So.
Well, and just because we just looked up the graph, the trend was about 10% increasing annually, sort of on average.
49.
And now it's below
Completely lost.
below 5.
Right.
It's been between 4.
Slide 49.
Yeah. So those are actually very favorable.
They are terrific numbers. And again, I'm sorry, but I have to keep doing this. They are even better in the fact that students are benefiting from being in Brookline in high-quality programs.
I might want want to see that chart superimposed with the non-special needs population cost, too.
Yeah, we have that on separate, we can do that.
Okay.
And we can provide that to you if you'd like to see it.
Anything else, Board of Selectmen? All right, well, thank you again,
Thank you
Superintendent
very much
Rudini.
thanks for the opportunity to speak with you, and we're looking forward really to working with you on this. Thank you for your continued support.
Very good. I want to remind members of the public that Thursday night is the first of our public hearings, and that's at 7 o'clock in this very room. This is an opportunity for you, the voters who will ultimately decide the question of this override, to let your voices be heard. And we look forward to that communication very much right now.
And the second one is Monday,
The 20th.
the 20th in the morning.
Right. Schedule one in the evening, one in the morning to accommodate varying schedules. And also, we're aware that Thursday night is the first night of the Jewish holiday festival of Sukkot, and that's why we've scheduled the second one as well. That concludes our discussion of Override Study Committee report for this evening. We have one other matter, and it's a quick one. It's the question of making appointments to the Council on Aging, and I turn the meeting over to Mr. Kleckner to propose that appointment.
Well, in this case, Mr. Chairman, it's really a slate, and in the case of the Council on Aging bylaw, the board is required to only appoint from a group of a slate of nominees, and so the Council on Aging has provided that for you. It's all inclusive. So you would.
I'm missing.
11-1.
There it is.
So all of the. I mean, I think you can simply refer to this.
Yeah, I got it.
You
This
can
memo.
just,
Yep.
yeah, vote the
Okay.
recommendation
So-
of the Council on Aging.
So I think we should list it, though.
Okay, I can do that.
So, yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, okay, so based on the recommendations of the Council on Aging, the following individuals are being proposed to be reappointed as citizen members. Peter Ames, Doris Toby Axelrod, Claire Lurie, Helen Liu, William Wong. Those terms would end on August 31st, 2017.
All in favor of that slate of applicants, say aye.
Aye.
And then there is a recommendation to then elevate two associate members to citizen members, and they are Yolanda Rodriguez and Celia Lascaridis.
All in favor of the promotion of the named associates, please say aye.
Aye.
Next is the committee of the Council on Aging's nominating committee would propose reappointment of associate members Phyllis Bram, Harry Johnson, Jackie Wright.
All in favor of those reappointments, say aye.
Aye.
And then
Unanimous.
finally, well, there's two others, but the nominating committee of the Council on Aging recommends new associate members Vera Sharma, Jean Doherty, Barbara Keene.
All in favor of those appointment of new associate members, say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
And then finally, the committee of the Council on Aging recommends that Evelyn Roll be honored or appointed as an honorary member.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes this meeting of the Brookline Board of Selectmen. See you Thursday.